Hey everyone, what you are about to hear is an interview I recorded while Nate was still out on paternity leave. We didn't know how many episodes we would need to cover him, and so for safety's sake, I did a couple. It might be a little confusing because Nate was back last week and he will be back the week after this. This was recorded a few months ago, so ignore any references to him being out. He will be back in the co-host chair next week, whether I want him to or not. I was not able to successfully stage my coup, so here we are. Hopefully that clears up any confusion, and please enjoy the show. So, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Words About Books. This is another special guest episode as Nate is still ignoring his responsibilities to take care of his child. Our special guest host today will be Scott, aka PizzaSnail, longtime listener and supporter of Words About Books, not only a fan, but also a contributor. It was Scott who created the Words About Books podcast logo that you see everywhere, and a couple other art assets that we've used here and there.
Yeah, everything created with Microsoft Word.
Yeah. I was going to ask if you wanted to mention that.
Oh, yeah.
Point of pride for you, and like everyone else in the art community is horrified.
Yeah, I didn't understand that. What do you use, Photoshop? This is the same as saying, I use Microsoft Paint to do stuff.
You know, Microsoft Paint, I think, might even be a little more legitimate.
No.
In the graphics world.
In the graphics world, you're absolutely right. Because there's certain things that Paint will do, as far as like pixel editing, that are sometimes easier than in other programs. So, yeah.
You and I have been friends for quite some time, and one of the things we bonded over was shared love of reading. And this is going to be in stark contrast to my first guest host, my wife, who cannot sit down and read a book to save her life. Whereas you have read, I don't know, thousands?
Yeah, by the time I was 25, I had read a couple thousand books.
Good Lord. I don't know if I might have hit 1,000 in my lifetime. I don't know if I've gone above that.
I don't read as much as I'd like to anymore. Just because of, work obligations and...
It catches up with you. Ironically, starting a book podcast, at first I read a lot more, and now I don't read nearly as much as I would like, because I get caught editing so much of my time.
Well, then I'll make sure that I set my levels randomly throughout the podcast.
Yeah, set your levels randomly throughout the podcast. Do the Nate thing where we agree not to say the F word, and then just say the F word as much as you want whenever I'm editing, because I'll just bleep it.
I think I could refrain from using curse words today.
He does it on purpose. I've heard him, like I listen back to recordings and he's like, and goes, and then he's like, edit that out, Ben.
Yeah, gonna need you to edit that on Saturday.
So yeah, over the course of our time together, I don't know how many times we've walked through Barnes and Noble and discussed which books are good, which books we've read, which ones we haven't, and which ones we'd recommend to each other. And so we kind of wanted to talk today about the challenges of book discovery, and how do you choose the books you want to read, and how do you recommend books to other people, because it's so much harder than recommending like a movie or a TV show. You're recommending like a huge time investment.
Oh, right. It's depending on the book. Look at something like Game of Thrones or Harry Potter books. They're huge. Giant 3-inch wide spines on the back end of a book.
Yeah, so that's part of the challenge is, especially since the 90s, I want to say, everything is a series. Publishers want series from authors. And so you could be recommending not just one book, but like if I recommend Lord of the Rings to people, and I probably will at the end of this podcast, I can't just say read Fellowship of the Ring, and if you don't like it, then you're not going to like Lord of the Rings. It's like, no, read all of it. It's all required. It's one book in my mind. And that is a huge ask. And most people would just look at me, and if I have not built up the credibility with that person, they're going to be like, yeah, I'll do that. And then never take that seriously at all.
Well, and with the recommendation of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and all the books that go with, you run into the problem today where they've got, 6 giant movies. Was it 6? Yeah.
It is now. I pretend there's 3.
That's like, 4 million hours of film. And I think people will go, oh, he recommended Lord of the Rings. Let's go watch it on video like a high school kid.
I don't want to pick on those people too much because I'm pretty sure they're the primary audience for my podcast.
But you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't want to go too much down the rabbit hole of Lord of the Rings, but like the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings movies are good. They're different. He had to change things, and they lose a lot of the mythology. They turn more into a cohesive adventure story that takes little detours into random mythology, like when Aragorn goes to get his ghost army. That sort of comes out of nowhere in the movie, but in the book it's more in place because you're used to like the legends of the past coming back and all that stuff. I want to say it reads more like a epic poem. It's not poetry, it's prose, but
oh no, it's very poetic prose.
Yeah, it's more like the Odyssey or something where it's like you don't have to explain why there's a Cyclops. It's just we're along for the ride now.
Well, if you want to think of it this way, is the books compared to the movie in that the movie is the walking tour of Tolkien's work. And then the book is the guide if you feel like going more in depth.
I think, that's a really good way to put it. So that kind of segues into one of the things we wanted to talk about is how do you pick out books for yourself? Do you watch something on Netflix, like the ones I'd never heard of, Takeshi Kovacs and Altered Carbon?
Oh, yeah.
That was something I'd never heard of. I didn't know it was a book. I watched the show not even realizing that, and it's like, oh, now I kind of want to read the book. Do you discover things primarily after they've already reached like broad popularity, or do you look around for the gems that are just coming out now, or
all of the things? So for me, I like to walk through the bookstore.
Yes.
Having previously worked at a bookstore in the early 90s for a short time, and having been responsible for taking care of the science fiction section and the fantasy sections, which were not the same and should not be the same.
Oh, you're igniting the.
Also, pineapple does not belong on pizza. Just saying. You can have your opinion, but I
don't like pineapple on pizza.
That's good. But I love the in-person, the tactile feel of the bookstore. Right now, I'm not overly comfortable going there and touching a bunch of things that other people have, but that's getting better. There's like Twitter. I'll see random things. Amazon. I have more books in Amazon than I can even ever read in my lifetime, probably at this point. Where I follow some authors there, so I get, good stuff. I think maybe I need to back this up a little bit. If you want to think of book recommendations as a series of concentric circles,
okay,
you and I would be in the center, and your wife as well, and some of my closer friends, where not only will I recommend a book, I will frequently pay for the book and hand it to you as we're leaving the store.
That is a good technique for ensuring I will at least give it a shot.
Right, and and if you don't like it, pass it on or pass it back or whatever. Somebody will like it. It's not a book for no reason.
That's true.
And then there's the second circle where they're like friends from work, or even acquaintances from work where I kind of know their personality and I've seen some of the things that they have on their desk. I would not recommend Lord of the Rings to the guys that bring in the NASCAR magazines. And I don't begrudge them that. That's their thing.
Yeah.
But, people that are bringing in the Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey and reading, and you find out that, oh, no, they're reading it for pleasure, not for a college class.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, anybody who plays, D&D, you can tell a lot based on what kind of movies somebody likes, what kind of games somebody likes.
Right.
One of the things I wanted to touch on before we move past the bookstore is just how important a bookstore still is for my personal discovery process. So you mentioned you follow authors on Twitter and on Amazon, and I have not gotten that into the digital recommendation space, which is probably strange considering I'm a programmer. I do a podcast. I am terminally on my computer. But yeah, I just like I've been on Goodreads for a while. I haven't found Goodreads to be that helpful. It's kind of I guess now I risk an unpopular opinion, but Goodreads reviews are kind of always overwhelmingly positive, and there's a certain bias in that people on Goodreads don't all rate things the same way. If they enjoyed reading a book, it's 5 stars. If they didn't enjoy reading a book, it's 1 star. And there's rarely much in between. And they don't put any thought into, is it a good book I just didn't enjoy?
Right.
And it's fine. I'm not saying those people are wrong to do that, because the other half of Goodreads is sort of curating your personal library. So some people do use it as just a way to track things I like, things I don't like. But other people are trying to use it as a book discovery mechanism, and that discrepancy causes a lot of problems. And so there's a personal touch, and that's kind of what we're talking about with how you would recommend a book to a friend. Is there's more going on than just, is this the genre you like? Is this a bestseller? Things like that. There's also, have you ever heard of the Reddit? I hope I get the name right. Books that feel like.
No.
There is a Reddit you can go, and I think it's called Books That Feel Like. You could post a picture or a song or anything, and just be like, recommend me books that feel like this.
Well, that's kind of an interesting concept, because you're taking potentially things from another medium and, bringing it into the realm of a novel. Or is it even just novels? Is it nonfiction as well?
You could recommend people any book, I think. They're looking for books that feel like whatever it is you posted. And I think that's kind of the art of it. Like, there is some like intangible thing we're all doing when we recommend a book based on, we as human beings process whatever that person posted. Say it's a painting of a forest or something. And we process, like, is it a dark forest? Is there a little edge to it? Is it a fairy forest? And we kind of read the emotion of the piece, and then we can recommend a book that made us feel that way. And that's something that I don't think a lot of the online stuff has really reached yet. Now, Twitter's a little different because there's a human behind it.
Right.
Ideally. But like, I think movie recommendation algorithms and music recommendation algorithms, there's been a lot of science put into that to figure out, like with music, it's like BPM, timbre, rhythm. They break it down and they figure out, like, okay, you like things with these elements, like, and you weight them at like 30%, and we'll generate a recommendation for that. But they haven't quite cracked the code with books yet.
No, and there's been some problems that you're, I'm sure, aware of with, like, Google had their AI and Facebook did as well, where within minutes of being on the internet and digesting as much as they could, they became very racist.
Yes. And you'll become very memey.
Memey?
That's, yeah. I mean, and it doesn't just happen to AIs, I hate to say. There are some people who go on the internet and become very corrupted by it.
I just arrived that way in the internet. But I communicate with memes a lot now.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just, you don't want to... I risk another unpopular opinion here. I cringe when somebody uses meme speak in real life.
Okay, yeah.
That's where I have a few friends who have lost the ability to separate the internet from real life. Like, they'll attempt to use a meme that really only works digitally in conversation at work.
Or people that say LOL instead of actually laughing.
Yeah.
That's a thing.
Yeah, they do it unironically. It
right?
Probably started ironically.
So, back to the circles of influence, though.
Yeah.
You've got that inner circle, that next circle, and then there's another circle out there that I find I do a lot in the bookstore. I've seen you do it some, like when somebody approaches you, but
yes.
If I see somebody holding something that I loved, I'll go, oh, hey, did you see this one? No. What's it about? And you can instantly tell, literally within 10, 15 seconds, as you're describing it, if that's of interest to them. Oh, well, maybe you'd like this instead. And in a 2-minute conversation, you've just influenced the purchase. And maybe they're picking it up as an extra book or, but I tend to be a good salesman and enthusiastic that way.
I wish I could do that. I'm not that extroverted. Probably surprising no one.
No.
The podcast is as close as I get to recommending things to strangers. And I do that in a very like I never want to hear from them.
Oh, you do though. That's the best part.
I do. Well, it's the best part until it's somebody who hates my opinion. Then it's not as much fun.
It's harder to deal with.
That doesn't happen very often, in all fairness. And even the people who I do disagree with, they've been pretty polite. The book community is a little more low key.
Most of the time, that's true. Start reading young adult books, and you're in a whole other fantasy realm of everything you say and everything they say is the most important thing in the universe, and they will beat you with a stick with a nail in it.
That is another thing I have to look for in people. So the circles you've mentioned, that seems kind of based on obviously how close you are to the person overall. But I think I would say in terms of whether or not they're going to read the book you hand them, it's a credibility thing. So the people you know well, you have a lot of credibility with. And the people you just know at work, like they might be willing to give it a shot, but if you recommend something that is like way off base, like for example, if you saw somebody who had like, I don't know, a Cthulhu pop vinyl or something like that, and you're like, oh, you should read this super intense cosmic horror book that has all these like sexual themes and violent themes, and then they read it and they're like, oh my God. And that's when you find out they haven't actually read Lovecraft. They just like the way Cthulhu looks. And they'll never read anything you recommend again. And now they think you're a weirdo. And
oh, right. Like back in the day with anime when it was first available here in the US.
It's only very recently that I talk openly in non-anime circles about watching anime. And even then, I feel like I have to clarify, like, there's, like, which genres of anime I don't tackle.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Because I've seen some of those things and I was just like, this is really a thing.
Yep, that's somebody's fetish.
You know, and I went and did some, just Googling around. Yeah, there's another weird thing to add to, like, vocabulary. That's just a verb. What did you do? I Googled it.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I have said that about things I was not Googling. I have said I'm going to Google that when I mean I'm just going to research.
But it's people. That's like saying I'm going to make a Xerox instead of saying I'm going to make a photocopy.
Yeah. Yeah, Google just owns research now.
Or you're going to grab a Kleenex when it's 18 different brand names of facial tissues.
Yes. Well, going back to the credibility thing, there's another layer I want to add to that of, okay, so you've got people you can approach. And as you have more credibility, you can recommend varying levels of things. So there's books that are, it's like music. You know, pop music has pretty broad appeal. So you're pretty safe putting on the top 40 at a party or something. You're not likely to, at the very least, you're not likely to like hurt anybody's ears. They're just songs that everybody knows. But that's not really who anybody is. Because it has such broad appeal, it doesn't have a lot of nuance always. It doesn't get into a lot of serious topics. So if you're going to recommend something that could be controversial or could get into like really deep themes, you not only have to have the credibility with the person to read it, but you have to really make some judgments about the other person and sort of try to put yourself in your shoes. And so how much about the other person do you feel like you need to know to put yourself in their shoes and assess how they might react to reading a book?
So the closer the circle, the more important it is to me to really be serious about a recommendation if I'm going to make it. That it's not an off-the-cuff bookstore kind of recommendation where I've met a person, I've talked to them for 30 seconds to begin with, and found out that, oh yeah, they liked this book or they had been recommended this book. And for this reason, and they start talking about other things they've read. Because a lot of people will do that. They like to share. Book readers like to share with each other, for the most part.
And there are precious few opportunities to do so.
That's right. Because it's hard to hear through my bubble.
Well, no, I was going to say, because honestly, books are a huge time commitment. And so I don't think it's unreasonable for a person to only read 12 books a year, if that.
Yeah.
12 fiction books a year, especially if they have a job where they have to read nonfiction or keep up with research and stuff like that. So there's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of books published in English every year, if not millions. And you read 12. What are the odds that you actually read the same 12?
Today, very slim. Early 90s, not so much.
So why do you think that is?
Because we didn't have the internet, there were some magazines you could buy, like genre-specific things that recommended. There's a magazine called Locus that covered science fiction and fantasy primarily. And so you could read through that if you were interested. And having worked at a bookstore, I used to pick it up every month to see what was new and coming out, what was it about, and the all-important, for shelving books. What does the cover look like? What does the spine look like? Because when somebody comes in and asks for a book, say, yeah, they're alphabetical for the most part if somebody hasn't moved it, but if I can recognize the spine like that, man, I just made somebody super happy. So now I can go to Amazon and type in any word I want, like fart and science fiction, and it will come up with 1,000 recommendations or more.
Not only that, on Amazon, you're likely to find like the #1 bestseller in fart science fiction.
Right. I mean, and I say that jokingly, but that's out there because so many people can publish digitally that the sheer massive number of books that are being published, self-published or otherwise, is...
Yes. Damn those digital self-publishers.
That's right. Those bastards.
Who would do such a thing? That's okay. Nobody read my book. I didn't take much from the pool.
I read your book. I bought your book.
You did. You were like one of the 50.
Yeah. It was good. I enjoyed it.
We have a new marketing model where you can pay $1 to buy the book and leave a 1-star review.
Nice.
It's an interesting problem, and that is, so let's say you're looking for a book or you're looking for where the buzz is, like those magazines used to provide, and you go online. Top 100 lists are all the same, and they're all very generic, like books you might be assigned in school, mixed with a handful of bestsellers from recent years. So maybe you go to like a forum. And even back in the 90s, you might have had like an old school like bulletin board forum that had a lot of super engaged people. Today, that'd be Reddit. And if you go on /our books today, it's hit or miss. It really depends like what time of day is what crowd you get, because you've got, if you say like, I'm a person who likes to read a bunch of YA books. I like YA books about dark academias, which is a thing.
Okay.
So like a YA book about a magic school. There's a bunch of them.
I get it.
You'll get a few, and they're going to be probably clones of the books you've read with different twists. You'll get like a clone of Harry Potter, a clone of Name of the Wind. And then you'll get, of course, the people who are like, that's stupid, you got to branch out. You can't just read the same kind of book over and over. And I think that's true to an extent. Like, I have a friend who likes YA romance. She just really enjoys that first kiss kind of romance. She doesn't necessarily want to get into like the romance genre of adult fiction where it's kind of hypersexualized. I shouldn't say that, but
it can be.
Yeah. And so she likes to keep it like cute PG-13. And I've recommended her books in that fashion, but I catch myself maybe trying to do books that overlap genres. So like Samantha Shannon, the Bone Season books.
Oh.
That was one I recommended to her because it's like right on the cusp of that YA. Like the protagonist is in like the transition period between like she's like 19, I think.
Something like that.
Yeah, she's like just getting out of the YA range, and the romance is still that kind of like a first kiss romance, but it's also got this like sort of urban fantasy thing going on.
Oh yeah.
And as the books go on, it moves. I feel like it moves a little bit out of the YA space and into like an adult urban fantasy, and I don't mean like a pornographic urban fantasy. I mean like for people,
Like an early
for
20s.
adults. Yeah.
Yep. Feel to it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and the author was that age
Yeah.
when she was writing these things. So, yeah. And you know what? I pre-ordered the fourth book
Oh, yeah?
and forgot about it. And when it was released in, what was January or whatever it was,
Yeah.
I was looking, I'm like, where did I get this? Because I went to buy it because it was on sale. They're like, you already own it.
Did you buy it on Kindle or something?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. I have that. She is one of the authors I do get paperbacks of. I don't think I have any hardcovers, but I do buy the paperbacks.
If I remember right, when I picked up the Bone Season, there wasn't a hardcover or a paperback available at the time in the U.S. I could have imported it from England, but yeah, no.
No. Well, that was actually a book you recommended to me.
It was. Oh yeah, I could not put that book down.
So what did you know about me that made you think I would like that book?
You played D&D. We'd gone out by the time I recommended it. We had gone out and had coffee a few times. Because when we first met, we got stuck in the car based on that. There was a bridge in the area that had caught fire because a diesel truck tipped over going too fast and melted the bridge.
Yeah, it melted 3 bridges.
Did it get 3 of them? Jeez.
Yeah, they had to replace all 3.
Yeah, that was nuts. But
that's a whole other story.
But we'd watched some movies together by that point and just kind of hung out, and we liked the interesting food from some of the folks we worked with.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was adventure. It was an adventure that I thought, as I described it to you, you kind of went, "Oh yeah," and your eyes lit up. There's just a look that people get. It's like I said, dopamine release before you even get to experience the actual, story.
I get that. You can definitely tell when people are there's a whole change in tone of voice and body language when somebody is actually curious about what you're talking about, as opposed to just doing sort of active listening to be polite.
Right.
So when somebody actually starts asking insightful questions about it, like for me, I remember thinking like Bone Season. That's a.
You thought it was pornographic. I know you did.
No, I didn't. I actually like the imagery that title conjures is like a field of bones, like some kind of like harvest of bodies.
Like T2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, that seems dark. So what's this about? And you started telling me. It's at that point I hadn't read a lot of urban fantasy, and so I hadn't read a lot of urban fantasy I liked, and I wanted desperately to like it because in the back of my mind I have a few story ideas of my own that are urban fantasy technically, and so I wanted to read some good urban fantasy to get an idea of what that would be like. And up until this point, I don't like Jim Butcher. I'm kind of famous for that on the podcast now.
No way.
I think the guy with a staff and a duster and a cowboy hat is dumb. Don't at me, bro.
I'm not. I'm being nice.
But this didn't have that. It didn't put me off that way. It was a little bit more accessible to me.
I thought it kind of reminded me of the Shadowrun type of thing.
Oh, yeah.
Where there's some tech, because they have some technology.
Yeah.
And then they have some, what can only be described as magic, their powers that intertwine in such a way that there's this undercurrent to the frosting or the fondant that is the ruling class of the society.
Part of the problem I have with urban fantasies is if they take themselves seriously, and that's not a problem, but if you take yourself seriously, how do you explain the fact that none of this is just part of normal society? Like, so many of them try to do the, for lack of a better word, the Buffy thing, where there's this like secret underworld of magic and stuff that nobody ever notices. But unlike Buffy, where they sometimes reference the fact that, like, isn't it weird how a lot of people die in this town? Like, isn't it weird how a lot of people die violently in this small California town? Some of these, they just hand wave it away with like, oh, normal people can't see magic.
The Muggles of the world. so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this actually handled it in a very different way. And so that was like people did know about it and it did affect the way the world developed.
Right.
And I like that she handled that and I liked the way she handled it. It felt like a kind of believable progression of events, and that was important to me.
Plus, it was, and this to me is important. I like science fiction that's real science-y, where the characters are just draped over the science. But she wrote real people.
Yes.
And even the not so human ones had a persona to them. And the interactions that they had with each other, as you progressed, even just through the first book, there's a growth there. And some of it's the growth together and growth apart and the loss of people, that kind of thing, actually impacts the characters. Whereas a lot of books, that's just kind of like, oh, Dave died. Chapter 3. And you never hear about Dave again.
What are your criteria then for recommending a book? And do you ever make a recommendation with a caveat like, read this, but like, wait? Like, for me, I think I've told people, you should read this, give it 100 pages.
Oh, absolutely. Because and especially you recommend, that would be a recommendation to somebody closer to you for me. In that I know that someone isn't that patient with a book.
If it doesn't hook my wife after 5 pages, we're out.
That's right. And I hate to steal this, but I'm gonna.
Okay.
And don't hate me for it. Don't at me, bro. Brah. Is,
Bruh.
like Marie Kondo says, it has to spark joy. Not necessarily actual joy in this case, but it has to make me feel something. Very similar to the way that music will give me goosebumps if it's that good.
Needs a hook.
Right. It really has to dig in and set its teeth in my brain. And most books, when I read them, it's like a movie in my head once I get into it. Like you said, the 100 pages sometimes, where you get used to the writer's style and the words just get read like a DVD. And
Yeah. And some of it for me is just, I'm a sucker for prose. There is actually an app, and it's in beta. It's called Readerly.
I've heard of it.
I'm in the beta for it. And one of the things they do, their goal is to be a better alternative to Goodreads as a book recommendation engine. And obviously I'm interested in this topic. We're talking about it for an hour. I go into Readerly, and one of the things they ask is like, how important is like beautiful writing to you? And I actually had to sit down and think about that because it can make or break something for me. Like, I'm trying to think of an example. Like, I think I would go with the Silmarillion, Tolkien. There are people I can recommend The Lord of the Rings to, kind of in this order. I can recommend The Hobbit to just about anyone. The Hobbit is a children's book. It's very accessible. Each chapter is a little mini adventure, and anyone could read it to their kids, and it would probably be fun for both. Lord of the Rings, a little more involved, demands a little bit more of you, a little bit more boring, but it's so rich. There's so much going on. There's so much to think about. There's so much in that world to just sink into. But that makes it less accessible because it's not as worried about entertaining you. Then there's the Silmarillion, which reads not unintentionally like the Bible. It's a collection of histories, imagined histories, and poems, and stories, and myths, and books of law, and things like that, just like the Bible. And it is at times confusing and incomplete, and I love it. I absolutely love it. But like, I am also, as I understand, one of the few people that can just sit down and read the Bible, because I also really like what's going. I like the mythology of it. I like myths and I like poems, and it's tough to recommend things like that. Even on this podcast, there have been times I wanted to read, like, I've been talking to Nate about reading something like, Lokasenna, the poem from the Poetic Edda where Loki shit talks all the gods. It's one of my favorite Norse poems, and it's hilarious to me. But I don't know how accessible it is to anyone else on listening to this podcast.
I think you'd be surprised.
I'm sure there's a lot of people who get a kick out of it, especially if we could make it a little bit more relatable. But I went on Goodreads and I was just heartbroken. I saw, I was reading, again, Norse myth. I was reading the Saga of the Volsungs, and some person commented in their review, they gave the Saga of the Volsungs like 2 out of 5 stars and said, didn't think it would be this boring. Like, you can't.
You made me choke on
like,
that
you
one.
Can't. How can one give a classic work of like mythology 2 out of 5 stars? It was just.
Okay, imagine for a moment, if you will, a world where that mythology is the actual mythology. That sumbitch is going to get to the afterlife, and they're going to be like, "Oh, hey everybody, let's drag him around through these puddles and beat him up against the side of our village."
Well, to me, it was just like, what are you going to give David and Goliath 1 star? He just hit him with a rock. What's so special about that? I could do that. 1 star.
Yeah, but
it's like
he was supposed to be huge and muscular, and
and he's supposed to be clever and crafty and a hero. And there is a little bit of like with myth, especially, there's a little bit of you got to know how to read it. And so that's like one of my criteria for recommending certain things to people is how curious are you? That's probably my biggest criteria.
Oh, right. Like if you tell me you have 4 kids and a wife at home and a house to take care of, and, I'll recommend things, if you're interested. But I don't necessarily expect you to ever have the time to do some of the things, to read some of the things.
If you don't have time to go learn a little bit about Norse culture and custom, then these poems aren't going to do anything for you. They're going to be very strange to you.
And they're strange enough to begin with.
You're going to wonder why, like, this guy's the hero? Things were different.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and the way that they talk about interpersonal relationships in those epic myths is very, very different than the modern world. It's, there's a mythical, magical quality about it when you start involving the gods.
A dream logic to things as well.
That's it. Yeah, that's it.
If you're a person who's very, like, concrete in your thinking, you need things to flow logically from one thing to the next. Mythology is going to infuriate you.
And that's a goosebump feeling.
So we kind of touched on this, but I guess maybe I'll ask it more directly. How has your interaction with social media affected what you read? I know you mentioned Twitter. I've talked about Reddit here and there.
Oh, everything. And Twitter, it used to be Facebook, but that's another story for another day. YouTube videos? Like, I'll watch something and somebody will be talking about a subject and go, "Oh yeah, I remember reading this." And, nice thing is I can Google it right then and there while I'm still watching the video. And sometimes I forget about the video when I do that. I get cookbook recommendations from my cooking videos all the time, which are awesome. And those are almost always gifts. I would never just recommend a cookbook to somebody because they're never going to buy it.
No, I'm never sitting around thinking I need a cookbook.
Oh, but I've had your cooking. You really should.
I was going to say, but if I had one, I would use it. Yeah. It's not a hint. You don't have to buy me one. But So I'm surprised to hear, though, that social media impacts you that much.
It makes me go look for things.
That's interesting.
It doesn't necessarily mean I choose it.
Do you think it's replaced those magazines?
Oh, yeah, because those magazines don't exist anymore. They're just gone. I mean, I'm sure there's industry magazines of some sort, but I'll bet you they're all online now.
I haven't found anything online that I can really trust. There are no online communities that really match my preferences. There's no curators out there I've found. Like, I know there are people that specialize in certain things that I would go to them for a recommendation if I was in the mood to read that thing. So I know there are people out there that are big fantasy people, and they only read fantasy. And I can tell them exactly what I'm looking for in a fantasy, and they can recommend one that fits. But my main problem with them is they just read every fantasy book, whether it's good or bad, in my opinion.
Right.
they just like fantasy, and there's nothing wrong with that. Of course, you like what you like, but one of the weird things I've experienced in trying to market this podcast is describe your podcast in a sentence, and it's like, well, we talk about books, all books, fiction, nonfiction, horror, fantasy, sci-fi, romance. Like
Isn't that, don't you have that theme song? Let's talk about
let's
books,
talk
baby.
about books, baby. Yeah, but so many people specialize in a genre, and I think the things I tend to love, both music and books and film, are things that kind of throw genre out the window. I like experimental pop music where they have like the four pop chords as the root of the song, but they'll experiment with different stuff from like EDM or rap or trap or metal even. And that's one of the things I've liked in the metal genre. I'm not a big metal head, but I like when they mix metal with pop. I like when they mix metal with rap and trap. And I like movies that aren't afraid to be scary and funny and make you feel.
Yeah, that's hard to do well.
And that's like, it's not to say I don't appreciate a genre film. Obviously, I'm a huge B horror fan. I watched Scream last night. But it is that case of, if you're somebody who reads 12 books a year, I want to make them count. I'm going to try to get you the best of the best.
Right. Whereas back in the day when I had, a security guard job, that after 6 o'clock nobody was there and I would still work till midnight, I could read a couple books a day.
That's...
Because, I read everything.
That's intense.
I worked overtime so I could afford my book habit.
I could read a book in a day, and that's a miserable experience. I don't enjoy it.
Oh, it was so exciting to have that time to do that. That it was great.
I guess if I could read at my job, that would change things a bit.
For pleasure, right. But our jobs don't afford us that, which is fine, which is good.
The one way, honestly, the only way social media has really changed my interaction with books and what I read is by doing this podcast. I guess it is a form of social media, but I could tell you I'm reading a bunch of books now that I would not have really had an interest in reading, either because Nate picked them or...
Didn't matter what it was. It was just because
before we started the podcast, I have read things he recommended me, but he has a different taste than I do. He likes wackier things. He's more into mysteries and stuff. But also, we get recommendations from listeners and friends who all want us to cover either sometimes their book or a book their friend did or a book they really like. And I've definitely been reading a lot more indie books, definitely been reading a lot more self-published books. And it's been an interesting experience just to sort of see what's out there, because it's a whole different ecosystem. And I almost want to say, like, I have been shocked to find the differences in influence between mainstream publications and the indie and self-published community.
Oh, they're like two different hemispheres.
I have found books coming out these days, and I suppose this is more common because it's just this generation grew up with it. Like, they remind me of anime. They remind me of like shonen manga, where they have like a battle system and they have characters that fight and grow more powerful, and it kind of is almost like I'm
Pokemon.
I'm sitting there reading what I feel like is a comic book, but it's a book and people are eating it up. And there's like 20 volumes in these series because they don't care. They can just publish with Kindle Direct Publishing. You can just publish whatever you want, as much as you want. And you don't need anyone's approval. And sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes that's a bad thing. Sometimes an editor is much needed. But if you've got an audience and your audience wants more.
Look at what happened with Wool.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Or even The Martian. I mean, that was a blog.
It was? I don't think I knew that.
Yeah, Andy Weir, he had the whole thing up. He published it like one chapter at a time on his blog, and that's why it's kind of like the book is like one chapter, one problem.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, and so that he self-published it, I think.
He did. The first printing was.
The social mediaification of books is probably the primary way it's affected me. Is you can post a book like you could post a tweet if you've got one.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are plenty of authors that don't care about ever getting paid for anything.
No.
That just publish them on their web pages, and you can just download the Mobi file or the EPUB or the PDF.
Well, and there's kind of no reason not to. I mean, unless you really don't like the book or you're afraid it would negatively impact your image, you hear these stories of people who have gotten published by like big four publishing companies of they had a whole novel they had to scrap because it wasn't sellable. And so they scrap the novel, they write another one, their second novel gets picked up. So what happened to that first novel? Well, it just sits in their desk until maybe they get famous enough and die and an heir publishes it finally.
And it still sucks, but it's got their name on it.
There's a John Steinbeck werewolf novel.
Serious?
Yes, that his estate has that they don't want to publish.
Ah.
And I want it. I'm sure John Steinbeck.
I would buy the NFT. Give me the NFT.
The Ghost of John Steinbeck. He does not want it published, but I want to read it. And so now with Kindle Direct Publishing, even if you're a famous author, just throw that thing on Kindle.
Yeah.
Well, the one thing I do miss, I've never been to you know what? I shouldn't say that. I have been to a bookstore that did it, but I don't know if Barnes & Noble does this. I don't know if any of the big chains do. The employee recommended section.
Barnes & Noble does.
I like that.
Well, yeah, because you can ask the employee and say, why did you like this?
Yeah. Well, and a lot of times they write on like a little card next to it, like a handwritten sort of synopsis of like what this is and why they think you should read it and who they think it's for. And I think that's a really nice touch. That's something that you'll never have online.
Not exactly. It's quickly dipping back into the Goodreads.
All right.
You were talking about the quality of the reviews were wildly varying.
Yes.
Because most people don't know how to read critically and write an actual review of something that would be acceptable to a magazine.
I would agree with that.
And I'm not begrudging Jane or John Doe.
Well, and a lot of them aren't trying to. That's part of the problem. Goodreads hasn't even set the expectation that that's what you should be doing.
See, and I think there should be a place for an actual critical review. And the type of reviews that are there now are fine. There's nothing wrong with them. They're just not what people should be striving for in a review, to my way of thinking.
It's not. There's got to be a different word for it. It's not a review. It's more like an impression.
Oh, there you go.
Like I have a 1-star impression of this, but a review, I think you need to think more about other people. What do you think people need to know about this that formed your impression? Why was it 1 star? A lot of people never answer that question. A lot of people just 1 star, book sucks.
Yeah, that's a great review impression right there.
Yeah.
That's like saying, what do you think of it? It's nice.
Yeah.
That's like throwing mashed potatoes at a wall.
And I've been
nice.
I'm not going to say I've never written a crappy Goodreads review, but I try to explain why a book didn't work for me or why a book did work for me or if my rating is inflated. I think I have given like joke ratings. Like I know a lot of the like God Emperor of Dune. I might have given it 5 stars.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. It's not a 5.
What did the people on Goodreads do to deserve that?
I think the first thing I said was nobody else will give this 5 stars. But
pretty much no.
But I said like I could listen to this giant worm Republican talk about politics all day, every day for the rest of my life. I'm so here for it, and I totally understand that nobody else probably is.
Yeah, no. 5 stars.
But yeah, so speaking of, I think it's time we're going to take all this knowledge we've accumulated in this discussion, and we are each going to recommend some books to everyone. Are these our general recommendations?
Sure, I think so, because these are books that I think anybody that would tune in and like, either one of us would enjoy.
Okay.
In the sense that these are recommendations that I give to people that I don't have to think about because I'm that positive about them. They're that high up the list. And these are all books I have reread multiple times because I enjoyed them so much.
Okay. I don't know. I'm not as confident in mine, but we'll go. You go first.
All right. Let me pull the... All right. So I've done this as like a 3-2-1 kind of a thing.
Okay.
So my number 3 choice is, speaking of funny and sarcastic and just a quick couple hundred pages of fun, is Castle Perilous by John DeChauncey. And so the official blurb that they give you on Amazon is, imagine life in an ironically magical world where 144,000 doors separate fiction from reality. It's a place that can hypnotize even the most grounded philosophy major and deliver a fantastical rhyme to his reason. A place where a best buddy resembles a shaggy carpet and adventures surpass a boy's dreams. Welcome to Castle Perilous. So this is totally the lighter side of things in the world. Bad things happen in Castle Perilous, but to great effect and great humor. The worse the event, the funnier it is. You know, pick it up, share it with your friends, and they'll go pick up the next 7 books because you will not be able to put them down once you start flying through them. The other recommendation that I go with that is, yeah, you can buy them new. They're a little pricey, but if you can find them in a used bookstore and get the prints from like the late 80s and 90s, the covers on them are like painted artworks. Beautiful. So that's part of that, texture of it.
I'll give a quick plug to someone I'm not sponsored by. Though they do affiliate links. I should probably set one up someday. Thriftbooks.com. If you don't have a good used bookstore in your town. If you do have a good used bookstore, go to it. But if you don't, thriftbooks.com. I think they ship internationally. You can buy and sell.
You should sign up for a Libris as well then.
A Libris?
A-L-I... Oh, now, hold on. I got to go look at the spelling.
I don't know this.
But yeah, it's... Because you can get... A friend of mine was going back to school for some kind of math. High-end math. High-level math.
Okay.
There it is. It's alibris.com. And she was able to buy the $200 book for $2.50 from these folks.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because she bought the 1974 edition of the book after verifying with the professor that nothing has changed other than to say, new and revised.
I think I've tried to... I'm going to give recommendations from my 3 big genres. So I'm going to do sci-fi, horror, and fantasy. And I'm actually going to give a horror recommendation. I'm going to give a horror recommendation from this podcast. It's been a while since we talked about it, but Head Full of Ghosts. As I said it, I couldn't remember if his name was Paul or John. So my recommendation is A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. It's a fairly recent horror book. I think it's fairly relevant. And it's a good example of what the genre can be. I won't go too much into it because we did cover it on the podcast, but if you're interested in horror books, check this one out.
Then my second recommendation is from an author, Piers Anthony, who you may know from other books, but my favorite of his is On a Pale Horse. And it's part of the incarnations of immortality where like forces of nature are actual people. And they have all the quirks and foibles that human beings have. And they're crazy. And so, there's Father Time, there's Mother Nature, there's war. This particular book is about death. And you can read it on the back of the book, so I'm not spoiling anything. Is some dude accidentally kills death, and guess what? He has to become death. Well, he screws it up pretty good. Again, to great effect. The writing is really solid. This is the most well-written of the incarnation of immortality. When you get towards the end of the series, I think he was phoning some of it in, but there was still enough of the references to the previous books. It was worth it. But it's I definitely recommend it.
I might actually have to check that out. I've never read it.
Really?
No, I've never read it.
Check your bullshit.
Did you plan it on me?
I'm pretty sure.
I will check it out. I know you gave me Good Omens, but
Yeah, no, I think I gave you. You might even check in your Amazon. It might have been digital.
Oh, you know what? I might have it. I might have it. I think I might have gotten it confused. There is another. I want to say there's another book called On a, or it might be called Behold a Pale Horse by a noted conspiracy theory lunatic.
Oh yeah, no, that's not it.
Yeah. So I think I might have seen that in my Kindle and been like, was I just morbidly curious? What is this? But no, maybe it was actually that book. If I'm going to recommend a fantasy book, I have to recommend Lord of the Rings. I know everybody's probably read it, or if you haven't read it, you don't want to read it. But if by some miracle you are interested in fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons, role-playing games of any kind, I have to recommend it. My sister would kill me if I didn't put it in a top 3 list. So that is my obligatory Lord of the Rings. I would start with The Hobbit if you're not sure, and work your way up from there. The Silmarillion is probably only for advanced people. I don't think I would actually recommend that to a general audience. By advanced people, I of course mean nerds.
My number one recommendation, the super fantastical number one, is Good Omens: The Nice and Accurate Prophecies of Agnes Nutter, Witch, by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. The official blurb reads, according to the nice and accurate prophecies of Agnes Nutter, Witch, the world's only completely accurate book of prophecies, written in 1655, before she exploded. The world will end on a Saturday. Next Saturday, in fact, just before dinner. So the armies of good and evil are amassing. Atlantis is rising. There's frogs are falling. Tempers, flaring. Everything appears to be going to according to the divine plan, except a somewhat fussy angel and a fast-living demon, both of whom have lived amongst Earth's mortals since the beginning, and have grown rather fond of living their lifestyle here on Earth. They are not looking forward to the coming rapture. So, also somebody misplaced the Antichrist. I was originally introduced to this book when I worked at the bookstore in the early 90s. I ended up getting pneumonia, and this coworker brought it to me, and I've since lost contact with it. I feel terrible. But even though I was so sick, I couldn't put the book down. And I bought more copies of this book, or lent this book more times than I can even count over the years. So, Neil Gaiman's Child's Braces, you're welcome.
No, in all honesty, if I hadn't been 100% sure you were going to recommend this, it would have been on my list. It is like, I wish I had, it's going to sound fake the way I say this, but like, it's just a joy to read.
Oh, absolutely. It's almost like Douglas Adams had a threesome with a demon and an angel.
Yeah. That's
their love child.
I don't even want to say, like, Neil Gaiman is such a good writer. He has such interesting ideas, and he, going along with liking mythology, he has such an interesting take on myth in everything he does almost. There is a mythical component to almost everything he writes. And Terry Pratchett brings in this humor and heart, and that together just makes it like an almost like magical read.
Oh yeah, and there's never been any other book. They had planned on it. It just never got written. And
that's a shame, because they were such a great pair. Third and final recommendation from me. I think I'm picking not the most entertaining book I've ever read, but one I was surprised how influential it was. So this is for the hard sci-fi. And I'm picking the Foundation series, particularly the first 3 books by Isaac Asimov. They're short. They're a little dry. I find Isaac Asimov's writing to be a little dry. But this laid the groundwork, I feel, for Dune, which is kind of what I did want to recommend, but I have done that too many times now. So I'm going to say the Foundation series, just particularly the idea of psychohistory and cyclical empire, and just sort of the insight into human nature and human civilization, and all the sci-fi elements he brings into that. I think those are really interesting ideas, and on previous episodes I've said one of the things about hard sci-fi is it's a little dry sometimes. It can be a little boring. It relies on the idea of the science fiction concept that they're playing with. It either kind of hooks you or it doesn't, because sometimes they develop the sci-fi concepts a lot and the characters relatively little. And that's kind of what you're getting into with the Foundation. The characters are thin, but it drives the plot, and the plot is kind of what you're there for, and it's very interesting, and it has influenced so many things. I think it's a good intro to sci-fi, and if you haven't read it and you've read a lot of hard sci-fi, it's a good thing to go back and explore.
Oh yeah, I read all of everything that Asimov wrote that was any relation to the Foundation series.
I have
a lot.
Yeah, I've read. I'm not going to say I've read all of the Foundation stuff, but I've read most of it. Like, I know the big reveal. I won't
at the end.
Yeah, I won't
we'll talk
spoil
offline.
it. Yeah, but that's part of the reason why I think like it's there's I don't know if Frank Herbert's ever said anything about it, but there's almost no way that Foundation didn't influence Dune.
Well, but they all knew each other.
Yeah,
You have to remember this, because that science fiction writing community then, from like the 20s to the 30s to modern day, those guys, especially in the 60s, so those guys are late stage career.
Yeah,
They all knew each other because of William Campbell.
Oh, I don't think I know who William Campbell is.
Yeah, I think I get the name right. Hold on. John W. Campbell. And he was a writer, but he also published a bunch of magazines. So like Astounding Science Fiction, he was the editor.
Oh, okay.
From 1937 until 1971 when he died.
Yeah, that's still going.
Yep. So basically he was the curator of the golden age of science fiction. So while you were talking about, the books that influenced you, that you recommend to other people, is in high school, we had to create expectations, which again, I read in 2 days over a weekend.
That's impressive.
And then I read it like 3 more times during the semester that we had to read it.
Oh,
Because it was one of those things, it was like at the end of the semester, it was like a midterm final or whatever. It was difficult for me to read because, it was heavy words, heavy reading.
Yeah.
Trying to read, Old English, basically. Older. But I was one of the lucky ones because, I was raised on Monty Python and Benny Hill. And so I was exposed to a lot of the British shows on the public broadcasting.
Mm-hmm.
Because, when you have 4 channels, you laugh. ABC, NBC, CBS, and PBS. And then when I was, 1986? Something. We got a Fox affiliate.
Oh,
These are all over the air.
So was it the Great Expectations?
Pip. It's this boy of lower upbringing.
Yeah.
Mrs. Haversham.
It's not that old, is it? I mean,
I think it is older than you think it is.
I was going to say, like, it's not pre, 1800s. I thought it was like a turn of the century.
No, I think it's 1800s.
Yeah, I thought it was late 1800s. So.
Oh, apparently there's a naughty movie called that came out in 1998.
1861.
There it is. Okay. My eyes saw 1961 there for a second.
Oh, yeah.
But still, they spoke that. It wasn't like Shakespearean English, but it was, old school.
Yeah, dated phrases, and it's it's that double whammy of like British English and speech that has aged enough to be not significantly different, but
you can understand it.
It's tough to get into the flow of it.
Yeah, but once I got into it,
yeah,
I was just fascinated that this book that I held in my hand was from, to me at the time I read it, all million years ago. Because it was before the century I was born in. That it captured my attention just like Jules Verne's stuff. Yeah, that could be an interesting episode sometime. Is the books that influenced you that you had to read in high school but you still loved. So it had to be at least one for everybody.
I don't know.
Maybe not. So, conclusion: recommend books to everybody. Just do it. And if they say I don't ever read, throw a magazine on their desk sometime. Give them something to get them. It's like bait. Reel them in. there's something out there for everybody. If you have friends that have kids that, maybe can't afford to go buy books and stuff, there's, you give them a gift of books. Because the parents will not tell you this, but they will read it in the funny voices and all this stuff because the kid will demand it.
Yes. Yes.
I'm going to mention this real quick. Dolly Parton also has a thing that for like the first...
Oh, yeah, I've heard about this.
5 years? They get a book a month?
Yeah.
For free or something?
Yeah.
And you can just look that up.
There's a couple good programs like that. Yeah, I think the other thing I'd say, just going along with that, is it is very rewarding to talk about what you've read. And it's especially rewarding to talk about what you've read with somebody else who has also read it so that you can engage with the material on a different level. You can have two perspectives on it. And I think in order to get people to read what you want them to read, to read what you like, you have to meet them where they are. You have to meet them where they are, and you have to respect their likes and dislikes. And if you do that, you can build credibility with somebody, and then eventually you can ask them to take a chance and read something that's really lame, like the Silmarillion. I'll make Nate read that one day.
What did he ever do to you?
I got a list, man. I got a list so long.
All right.
Every episode of this podcast, it gets a little longer.
Wow. I'm going to hide under my desk when we're done. Just saying.
So, Mr. Scott, do you have anything you want to plug here at the end?
Well, I very occasionally stream on Twitch as PizzaSnail. I'm on Twitter frequently. I do respond to legitimate DMs. I am one pizza _ snail on Twitter. And this weekend, I'll finally be putting some content up on a website I've started for my creative endeavors to live in, called Brainfire Cowboy. I'll definitely write an introduction to, and those links will be available on the blog. Is that right?
Yeah, I'll put your stuff in the blog. I'll also put it in the description.
Oh.
You know the drill for us. Check out blog.wordsaboutbooks.ninja for the show notes and commentary. Check out our Twitter, WAB Pod. And I think you've had enough plugs. I'll leave it there. So thank you, everybody, and good night. I don't know. Shy likes mythology, but she doesn't. Yeah. She doesn't like my douche philosophy corners.
No.
No one does.
I find them entertaining.
Well, Nate, you're replaced. Don't come back.
I find them entertaining in the same way that I find sitting on a park bench watching icy stairs, just waiting for someone to try to walk down them. Because I'm like,
I don't know how to take that.
Somebody's gonna get hurt.